So the title of this talk is The Transformative Power of Slow Breathing, and not, as it appeared in some early programs, No Time Like the Present. I don't know if you saw that, but that was because Kevin emailed me a few months ago and said, let me know the title of your talk in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I wrote back immediately. I said, No Time Like the Present. It's called The Transformative, but he missed the second bit. Okay, so I'd like to start, that's a bit loud, isn't it? I'd like to start by asking you to do the last thing in the world I ever thought I would ask a group of people to do. In fact, if I was sitting there and somebody asked me to do it, I'd probably think about leaving. But I'd like to do it, and then later on in this talk I'll explain why. So what I'd like us to do, just for like 1 minute or so, is chant Om. Okay? And the way I want us to do it is to take a good deep breath, do an Om, and really focus on the way it vibrates in your sinus cavities. And the reason for this will become clear later. So you don't have to do this, but you can. So, Om. Breathe in through the nose. Om. One more time. Om. And breathe in through the nose. Okay. So, the claim, number one. Deep, slow breathing is the quickest, the most universally accessible. That means everybody can do it. Way to shift us into a deeply parasympathetic state. And if you can't quite remember what a parasympathetic state is, I'll say more about it later. Allowing us to be calm, centered, and open and trusting. Human beings at their best. If we practice it ourselves regularly, it will improve our health and emotional well-being. And it will serve us very well in our practice with our patients. Because when we are in a calm, centered, parasympathetic state, one of the wonderful things about Homo sapiens is we transmit that to others. In ways, again, I'll explain later in this talk. But yes, we need to start with ourselves, but then it's something, a tool we can offer our patients. We can teach them how to slow breathe, and it will be a great gift to them to help in the process of their healing and recovery and well-being and their mental and physical state. And claim number 3, it's just the biggest and the best thing ever and will make us all really great again. Okay. So I got interested in looking a bit more into breathing because I've been, as Angie said, practicing Qigong mostly for a long time now, and I feel it benefits me immensely, and I was curious to understand why, because it doesn't really fit, it is a form of physical movement, it doesn't fit the criteria of Western exercise. It's not aerobic, it is reasonably strengthening, but it's not like, it's not like going to the gym and lifting weights. A lot of the things that are claimed as the benefits of exercise are not apparent in something like Qigong, a bit like yoga. So what's going on? Why are these practices, Qigong, Tai Chi, yoga, Feldenkrais, Pilates maybe, meditation, why are they so good for us? in the Chinese tradition, I find within the Chinese tradition a very useful, smart way of classifying all kinds of things. There's a very brilliant classifying mind, and you may know that practice, physical practice, exercise in China was certainly from the 18th century onwards roughly divided into two kinds. One was called Waijia and the other was called Neijia, external practice and internal practice. And most Western exercise is what we would call external practice. And in the Chinese tradition, that corresponded to the main physical exercise that people performed, which was martial arts. Particularly the certain, like the Shaolin tradition of martial arts, with lots of training where you run a lot and you run around carrying heavy weights and do loads of kicking and punching and flying through the air and smashing bricks over your head and all that kind of thing. What we think of as kung fu. But the arguably more sophisticated traditions centered around, originally around the Wudang Mountains in China, were called Neijia, internal practice. And internal practice focuses really on different things. External practice, like going to the gym, develops great aerobic fitness and lots of muscular strength. It's great in many ways. It's a potent antidepressant. We know that many people self-medicate their mood through vigorous exercise, although the effects are fairly short-lived and you have to keep repeating the dose. Do you understand that idea? That's one thing that leads to exercise addiction. People get relief from deep, profound stagnation through rapidly and powerfully moving their body. It moves the qi and blood, and then within 2 or 3 hours, stagnation re-establishes itself. Internal practice, I would say, focuses on one manifestation or one understanding of Jing, Qi, Shen. In this case, Jing being the body, Qi being the breath, and Shen being the mind. And it's the equal cultivation of body, breath, and mind that are wrapped up into a seamless whole that provides the rich benefit and power of internal practice. So, let's go back there. Much as I would love to speak at length about how internal practice cultivates the body, I won't, because that's not the subject of today. And I won't say much about the mind, except simply, fundamentally, it's very simple. When we practice internally, the mind is completely absorbed in what we're doing. Full awareness, full presence. And that has, as you know, if you know anything about meditation practice, and particularly meditation research, that already has profound effects on our mental and physical state. To train the mind to be present. Yeah? Lots of interesting things happen. Certain areas of the brain grow if we practice regularly. We develop greater emotional self-regulation, and so on. You might think of these practices some of these internal practices as moving meditation. But the aspect of Neijia, internal practice, I want to talk about today is breathing. Here's a quote from a rather gorgeous book that not so many people know. It dates from around roughly the same time as the Tao Te Ching, 4th century BCE, and it's a book about practice, Neijia, internal training. It says, as for the vitality of all human beings, it inevitably occurs because of balanced and aligned breathing. The reason for its loss is attachment to pleasure and anger, worry and anxiety. So breathing is an interesting exception to autonomic body activities. So autonomic body activities are the ones that go on without our attention. Our heart is beating right now, our intestines are peristalsizing, it's probably not a word, as our stomach is digesting. Not only do we not have to, could you, I turned the temperature up because it was so cold in here, but it's a bit high, so if you could turn it down again, thanks. In fact, it's very hard to control the beating of the heart. It can be done. It's hard to control peristalsis and so on. Now, breathing is an odd one because it's autonomic in the sense that we can go through the whole 25 hours without once being aware that we're breathing. Yeah? We're just going to breathe. But you can also be consciously controlled. And therein lies this really interesting power. And in the traditional Asian self-cultivation traditions, this ability to work with and control the breath is used as a powerful tool for emotional, physical well-being and health. So let's take, what I'm going to do is talk a bit about the Chinese understanding of breathing, Chinese medicine, Chinese self-cultivation understanding. Then I'd like to do a bit, so we know what we're talking about, talk about the practicality. And then I would like to talk briefly about science, which is something I find very interesting. So from the Chinese medicine perspective, I always remember a doctor in China laughing, saying, human body's got a design fault. Yeah? It's got two problems. Number one, it's alive, and number two, it's vertical. It's quite unusual to have a vertical body. Most animals don't. So because it's alive, it has lots of qi and yang, and because it's vertical, we suffer from a default risk or tendency that qi and yang rise too much, yeah? Especially as we age. Because as we age and yin declines, yin is no longer able to hold and grasp and balance the tendency of yang to rise. So we get excessive rising of yang in the form of high blood pressure and dizziness and strokes and various other problems. And at the same time, qi and yang leave the lower body, they abandon the lower body. Yeah? So we get fullness above and emptiness below. So the legs become weak, our balance is poor, we lose agility and so on. And mentally, the equivalent that happens, and this is not just aging, sorry, I should be clear, all these things can happen at any point in life, and mentally certainly can happen at any stage in life. When yin and yang become detached and yang rises excessively, particularly in the form of heart yang, so that basically means heart fire, rising, then we get worry, we get anxiety, we get fear, we get agitation, we get inability to reside calmly in the present. And it's no surprise to say many, many people suffer from this. Many of our patients, many of us, we're human just as much as our patients are. So our spirit becomes, our shen becomes restless, becomes unstable, and we're not fully grounded. So, how does this relate to breathing? Well, the first thing is that a lot of us do chest breathing. If you ask people to take a deep breath, for example, most people will go, like this. That's called chest breathing. So it inflates the upper part of the chest, and that's the opposite of what we want. When we chest breathe, it increases feelings of stress, it raises the center of gravity, it brings qi up to the upper body. Now, the anatomy of the lungs is that the lungs can expand in all the directions. They can expand up, forward and back, and downwards. But because of the reasonably hard carapace of the ribs, the greatest potential area of expansion of the lungs is downwards, taking the diaphragm down. And actually, the lower part of the lungs is more richly supplied with blood vessels. So we can oxygenate better when we breathe downwards. And breathing downwards from the Chinese view lowers qi. Yeah? What is the qi direction of the lung? It's descending. The lungs are not meant to inflate up above, it's meant to descend down to the kidneys. So breathing has to be deep and low, not held up above. So in internal practice, in the Chinese internal practice certainly, for both the physical tendency of yang to rise and the tendency of heart fire to rise, we prioritize descending. So we stand in ways, when we're practicing, we don't do this normally, that would be weird. We stand in ways where we root into the ground. We drop, we lower our center of gravity, we let the lungs relax, we quieten the heart, we quieten the lungs, and we take our attention downwards to rooting. Yeah? And this is a way that we counter the tendency of yang to rise physically. It's still very hot in here, isn't it? Yeah, let's do a window. You did. I knew that. I used to be in a band. I remember that. Mustn't take the mic in front of the speaker. Great, fabulous. So we do it by posture, yeah, and we do it by breathing. We do it by descending the breath to the abdomen, keeping the chest empty, the heart and the lung are quiet. As Zhuangzi, I don't know if you know Zhuangzi, the great Taoist philosopher of around the 3rd century BC, the perfected breathe all the way to their heels, unlike ordinary folk who breathe only as far as their throats. Sounds a bit arrogant, doesn't it? So the effect of slow, deep abdominal breathing is to calm and cool heart fire and lower it into the cooling, calm embrace of kidney water. Understand? Now we know this is universally understood because deep, slow breathing is much used well outside the Chinese medicine profession for anxiety, for helping anxiety. Okay, so I think this is probably a point that we will, before we get into the science of it, let's talk about slow breathing in practice. So I remember hearing a story about Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi. This woman brought her son to him and she said, Mahatma, I'm not going to do an accent, Mahatma, please tell my son to stop eating sugar. He's addicted to sugar. And Gandhi said, sure, okay, come back in 3 days. It's a bit convenient. She went away, came back in 3 days, and Mahatma said, young man, you must stop eating so much sugar. And she said, thank you. Why did I have to come back in 3 days? He said, well, I had to stop eating sugar first myself. See? So if we're going to teach slow breathing to our patients, we need to do it ourselves. It needs to be real for us. We need to really understand the benefit of slow breathing. So, let's talk about the practicalities. Now, if you go to, go online and go certain places, you'll be taught a method of abdominal breathing, which usually is done lying down, and you rest one hand on your chest and the other hand on your abdomen, and you breathe slowly, and the aim is that your top hand doesn't rise, so the lungs are not inflating above, and the hand on your belly rises. So you're taking breath down and the belly expands. Okay? That's quite a useful method for beginners, but I don't think it's necessary, and it's not particularly nice to develop a big lower belly. You don't need to do that. So the way I teach breathing, and this can be done when people are lying down or sitting or standing. So let's try this bit. No, let's try it standing up. Do you mind? This is a practical class. Is there another window there or not? Great, thanks so much. So if we stand with our feet roughly shoulder width apart and the insides of the feet parallel to each other, and we relax the knees, so our centre of gravity drops, the pelvis just drops into the earth and hangs very comfortably and naturally. And then if we take our hands and fold them over like that and close them over the navel, resting on the navel. Shoulders are dropped, shoulder blades are dropped. Okay. So we're going to breathe through the nose, but we're going to imagine that we're breathing in through the navel. The air is coming in through there. I think that's quite easy to do, to imagine. And it goes into the core of the body, and it fills the lower back and sides here. So it actually goes sort of through from Renate to Ming Men, and then widens and fills, and also fills down into the abdominal cavity. Okay. Some of you find that difficult. You'll feel that you can't. As soon as you start breathing slowly, you feel stagnant in the chest. You feel like, well, I can't get my breath down. That's all right. That's quite normal. But if you can, and don't get stressed about it, just try and encourage the breath down. So we'll take a few breaths like that, and then we'll try and slow it down. So just at your own time for the moment, take the breath in through the navel, through the core, into the lower back, fill the lower back and sides, and then breathe out and empty it. Okay, now the study into breathing, quite a lot of research being done in breathing, identifies a rate of breathing which puts the body into the body-mind into what they call a coherent state. And that's around 5.5 breaths a minute. It varies a bit from person to person. For men and tall people it's a bit slower, for women and shorter people it's a bit faster. You have to find your own rate. But I'm going to set a guideline rate, and there's loads of apps you can get now, free apps called Coherent Breathing, that will time it for you. So I'll set a rough rate, but don't force it. If you find it's too slow, you must never force the breath. It's quite a potent tool, so you can go wrong if you try and force. So I'll set a guideline, and if it's too slow, speed it up. So if we all start by breathing out, and then breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and out. 2, 3, 4, 5, and in. And out. Okay. Now, it's also can be helpful to add a little bit of movement in to this. So we breathe at the same pace, but we actually activate the body as well. There are additional benefits from that. So a bit shorter space. So bear in mind these are things that you might want to show your patients. Yeah? So what we can do is the same position, shoulder width apart, pelvis dropped, bring the arms around to the front of the body. And what we're going to do is we're going to let the elastic body settle into itself. That would mean the soft tissue closes and the joints close and stuff. And then we keep the arms very passive, but as we breathe in, we just lengthen through the body, like the body's elastic, and we're just stretching the whole body. So I don't know whether you can see me, but if you can, for me it will look like this. So I'm going to breathe in. And out, and I'm going to let the body settle back into itself, all the soft tissue closing, all the channels shortening and closing, and then lengthening through all the channels of the body, or all the fascial planes, or however you want to envisage it. Always trying to breathe into the deep core. The mind is present, absorbed. Okay, and we can't do it, I think, because of space, but you're probably all familiar with the simplest of all Tai Chi and Qigong moves, which you can also practice and show people, which is simply the same movement through the body, but the arms just, see if you can, I don't know whether you hit the person in front, the arms just float up to shoulder height. Elbows drop, soft wrists follow behind, floating down. Don't stop, just roll it forward. Soft elbows rise, soft wrists follow behind. Okay, might be time to do a bit more afterwards. I don't know how it's going to go. So just for now, just to give you a little taste. Yeah. So you can sit now. So if you're teaching this to a patient, you need to be confident about what you're doing. So you need to be into it yourself. And then your words will have a greater effect. Actually, people can do it when they're lying on the couch. So if it works, position-wise, you can just ask them to rest their hands on their navel and to breathe into here whilst they're lying with the needles in to enhance the effect of needling. If they suffer from anxiety, fearfulness, if, as we'll see in a minute, their default state is sympathetic activation, which I'll explain, then we really want to encourage them to practice it every day, so twice a day for 10 minutes. So let's look at a bit of the science. So first of all, I want to talk a bit about nitric oxide. I'm not remotely science-based, so I had to struggle a bit with some of this stuff myself. So nitric oxide, which is not nitrous oxide, is a gas. I think I'm not sure it's always in gas form. Actually, no, it's not always in gas form, but it can be. It acts as a vasodilator. It opens and widens the blood vessels, and it also opens the bronchi, the lungs, and so it lowers blood pressure, increases oxygenation, improves blood flow to the brain and to the genitals and to the muscles. So what's the most popular form of nitric oxide? Anybody know? Viagra. That's the mechanism that Viagra works. And also apparently bodybuilders take it now because it opens up the blood vessels. It makes it easier to build bulk muscle. It also has antiviral, antibacterial and antifungal properties. So where do we get it from? Well, it's found in some foods. This you can write all this down, but it is available from the website. You know, I know they made it available, the handout. It's up to you. Anyway. So it's found in certain foods like dark leafy vegetables, beets, celery, blah, blah, blah. Exercise stimulates it to a certain degree, and sunlight stimulates it to a certain degree. But one interesting way for the subject of this talk, it's stimulated, is it's created in the paranasal sinuses. So that when we breathe in through our nose, we absorb nitric oxide with the breath. That's why we should never breathe in through the mouth. And when people are forced to mouth breathe, I can't remember all the consequences, you know, but blood pressure rises, for example, has negative consequences. Okay, and the interesting thing is, the same Swedish researchers who discovered that nitric oxide is produced normally in the paranasal sinuses, and we inhale it when we breathe in through the nose, discovered that when we hum, its production of nitric oxide is increased 20-fold. So that would kind of explain the fact that lots of traditions like to chant and hum through the nose. They've just discovered that it feels good. It does you good. So that's the first thing about sort of science. Secondly, carbon dioxide. So we're all interested in, I think you probably say, we all think, oh, getting more oxygen is good. We all feel getting more oxygen is good. And as I said, often when people want to get more oxygen, they'll breathe faster. They'll do chest breathing, you know, oh, it's a great day. Okay, so that doesn't oxygenate you. It doesn't work. And what happens is it lowers carbon dioxide. It lowers the percentage of carbon dioxide in the blood. And they call it, and also when, as I'm sure you know, when people get stressed and get anxious and they get fearful, they breathe faster, they breathe more shallowly, so they hyperventilate. What then happens when carbon dioxide reduces in the blood is you start to feel anxious, you start to feel stressed, and you start to feel fearful, and you can go into panic attacks. It also vasoconstricts, that means the blood vessels contract when you hyperventilate. That reduces oxygen, raises blood pressure. You get less blood flow to the brain, which means your judgment is impaired, your attention, your concentration. So if you get into a stressed state and you're hyperventilating, you're less able to coolly and calmly find a way to deal with the situation. So it's a vicious circle. Hyperventilation is a vicious circle. And if you go into panic attacks, probably everybody knows the folk remedy, or is to breathe in and out of a paper bag. You're familiar with that? That's to restore levels of carbon dioxide. Okay, so when we slow breathe, slow abdominal breathe, the trigger for us to inhale, when we breathe, the trigger to inhale is raised level of carbon dioxide. That's why we breathe in. But if we play with that and don't immediately respond, because if we're breathing normally, we're breathing 20 times a minute, 25 times a minute. So when we slow it down, we're training ourselves not to immediately respond to the raised carbon dioxide trigger. So we allow ourselves to be a bit air hungry. Is that clear? And that allows carbon dioxide the level of carbon dioxide in the blood to go up. And carbon dioxide is a potent vasodilator. It opens up the blood vessels. So did anybody find, I know we only did it for 2 or 3 minutes, did anybody find with slow breathing that they felt warm? Yeah? Why? We're not doing anything aerobic. Why should it feel warmer when we just stand there doing absolutely nothing, slow breathing? So it's vasodilation. We increase the carbon dioxide in the blood, we get vasodilation, lots more blood to the extremities and everything. So allowing the carbon dioxide in the blood to increase increases blood and oxygen to the brain and the heart and calms the nervous system. Okay. So those are two, nitric oxide and carbon dioxide are two responses to breathing practice. But I think the most significant one is the effect on the autonomic nervous system. So you probably know, excuse me to repeat it, but it's never any harm to just go over simple things. So it's a wonderful example of yin and yang, the autonomic nervous system. So we have what we would call a yang branch, which is the sympathetic nervous system. It's associated with quite an ancient response, a mammalian response, which is the fight or flight response. Okay. So I will come back to this, but there is a theory that in terms of defense strategies, zoologically, the most ancient one is the reptilian response, which is the freeze response, the play dead response. I've got frogs in my garden. If I uncover a frog, I'm not moving, you can't see me. Yeah? If the cats catch them, they play dead. That's the reptilian response, which we all have in us. Some more than others. So when, in moments of crisis, some people freeze. When the London Bridge attackers roaring through the streets, some people ran, some people froze. When people are sexually abused, physically abused, if you read the Harvey Weinstein stories, a lot of people said, I just froze. It's like I disassociated from my body and this was just something that was being done to me, and they later feel a great deal of shame about it. But it's been explained very well by some really interesting work on the polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges, that actually under the circumstances they were defending themselves. They weren't strong enough to fight. Flight was not an opportunity. They were doing the only thing they could do, even if it was ineffective. They should feel no shame about it. Then a more sophisticated defense response is the flight or flight, sympathetic activity. So when we are in sympathetic state, when we face threat, when we need to act fast, when we need to focus intensely, when we seek excitement, when we do thrilling things, when we watch thrilling movies, when we jump around to really exciting music, we go into the sympathetic state. So sometimes it's a necessary response to danger and threat, and sometimes it's a choice we make because it's fun. Yeah? We can get a kick out of the sympathetic response. So the blood vessels contract, pupils dilate, blood pressure goes up, heart rate goes up, we breathe faster, and we're hyper alert. And that can be very enjoyable, as long as we're in control of it. Yeah? As long as we are able to leave it when we want to. But when it becomes pathological, and of course it does become pathological in many, many, many people, it becomes a default state. So you have people who are in constant sympathetic activation. They're constantly feeling, might be low levels of stress, or they might be high levels of stress. They are fearful, anxious, very defensive, they worry, they can't feel emotionally close. Sympathetic response is not interested in emotional intimacy. There's no place for that really when you're in full sympathetic mode. Poor judgment, poor reasoning, feeling threatened, the freeze response, paralysis, post-traumatic stress disorder, and flashbacks. This is when people get stuck in excessive sympathetic state. In that state, we burn energy in the cells. Well, we need to, because we might have to run or fight. But chronically, that leads to cell inflammation and potential cell damage. And we now think that the majority of the chronic non-infectious diseases are due to inflammation. It's a major factor. And if it's too prolonged, the cells can't repair themselves, and you get a spiral of increasing physical disease, chronic disease. And then we get to the parasympathetic yin branch, the rest, relax and digest branch. The blood vessels dilate, soften and dilate. Heart rate goes down, blood pressure goes down, the immune system is enhanced, the cells are nourished and repaired, energy reserves restored, anti-inflammatory pathways activated, mind and body are calmed, and we experience feelings of trust, safety. Safety is really important. Relationship, closeness, affection, free flow states that we would recognize from Chinese medicine. So I mentioned Stephen Porges, who talked about defense mechanisms. So to remind you, the most primitive is the reptilian response. The next defense response in evolutionary terms was the sympathetic fight or flight response. So he came up with his polyvagal theory, discovering that I don't know how much you know about the vagus nerve, one of the most interesting nerves in the body. It connects the brain. Vagus comes from the same root as vagabond, or wandering. It wanders through from the brain stem through most of the major organs of the body, particularly the heart, sending information both ways. And branches of the vagus nerve go to the facial muscles, and to the larynx, and to the ears. So Stephen Porges' theory is that, and I don't want to do him disservice, this is perhaps my interpretation of his theory, is that mammals, and particularly Homo sapiens, came up with the most sophisticated yet defense system, which is, and the reason we are all able to be in this room together, feeling completely safe, is that we are constantly giving out to each other messages of safety. And we do that through our facial expression, our facial muscles, through the tone of our voice and what they call prosody, which is the pacing and tempo of the voice, and our ability to listen. Yeah? And so what we do to make ourselves safe is we, from a parasympathetic state, we transmit safety to others. I'm safe, you're safe. You know, we're not like a bird on the lawn. You know, anybody watches birds? Yeah? State of constant alertness. Yeah? We don't need that, we've gone beyond that. It's one of the great beauties of Homo sapiens, is it enabled us to cooperate and work together in so many ways. Yeah? But some people are completely unfamiliar with that state. Yeah? They don't trust. They can't easily read messages of trust. Yeah? And some people are never in true parasympathetic state. They're always tense, they're always alert. Yeah? And that will apply to many of our patients. So, one of the great things we can do as practitioners is to cultivate in ourselves real, true parasympathetic state. So when we encounter patients, to the degree that they are able to, they will be receiving messages of safety and trust from us. And that may be a rare opportunity for them. And that is a really significant contribution to the healing process. But you can't fake it. We're smart. It's all going on an unconscious level, but somebody can put on the most caring voice, you know, and they can smile with their mouth, and they can pretend to listen when it's quite clear their mind is somewhere completely else, you know. But we're clever. We know it's not real, so we don't get the benefit. So this is a great gift we can give. This is going back to, you know, one of the many manifestations of the traditional idea of the sage healer. You know, not a tranquilizer and whiskey swilling, semi-suicidal, stressed GP. Apologies to GPs, but you know, somebody's truly, committed to cultivating themselves for their own benefit and for the benefit of their patients. So we need a healthy balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. We don't want to go through life stoned out of our heads and deeply parasympathetic state all the time. It's really boring. Yeah. We want to be able to act effectively in the world, quickly, decisively, efficiently, but always holding parasympathetic core. You understand? This is what you train in the internal martial arts. What's the worst thing can happen to you you get in a fight is you lose your core. You lose your center. Or you're I can tell there's a load of football fans in the room. You know, you're a striker, you're through on goal, there's the goalie. It's really easy to score, but you just lose it. You lose it and you lose control of your movements in your body. But just all the time in life, we need to be able to act, be in sympathetic activity state, but hold a parasympathetic core. So we need to balance, work, yin-yang balance was a dynamic balance. And when we do go into sympathetic state, we need to be able to quickly revert back to parasympathetic. So that's our default state. So, this is from a Chinese 16th century book. The cool eye discerns men's character. The cool ear hears the intent in their speech. Cool emotions plumb others' feelings. The cool mind penetrates everything. So again, about the dynamic balance between, yin and yang in the autonomic nervous system. We want a flexible nervous system that responds appropriately to events and builds what they call stress resilience, the ability to respond to stressful events and to recover and rebound from them. So how do we promote a balanced autonomic nervous system? We can do it by relaxing, not very effective, meditating, quite challenging for some people, meditation. We can do it, interestingly, they've discovered with rhythmic muscle lengthening. That stimulates parasympathetic state. But the most effective way that works, as far as we know, on all human beings, is we go into slow breathing at around that rate, between 5 and 6 breaths a minute. And it is the quickest and easiest way for humans to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. It tells the brain that all is well. Yeah, just because I've been told there's 5 minutes left. So just a little bit more detail. Actually, when we breathe in, the sympathetic nervous system is activated. When we breathe out, the parasympathetic. When we slow breathe, it brings everything down, but it's still the case. So if we want to more strongly enhance parasympathetic state, we breathe out longer than we breathe in. So you get these breathing techniques. You can breathe in for 4 seconds and breathe out for 10 seconds. But the other way is doing things that loads of people love doing, like singing, la 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 la, yeah. Breathing out against resistance, playing wind instruments, chanting, or if you must, preferably don't, playing the didgeridoo. So more prolonging exhalation or exhaling against resistance more strongly stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. And slow breathing is the only non-pharmacological method approved by the US Food and Drugs Administration for lowering blood pressure, acute and chronic blood pressure. Practice 10 minutes a day or a couple of times a day. It's a proven effect in lowering blood pressure. And interestingly, just going back to medication, I think nearly all medicines given for anxiety dampen down the sympathetic nervous system, but none of them activate the parasympathetic. I don't think they know how to do that. Resources to find out more about this. This is a wonderful woman, Patricia Gerbarg. She's a psychiatrist with her husband, Richard Brown. They've written a book called The Healing Power of the Breath, but they've done lots of work using slow breathing with trauma survivors, people suffering PTSD from post-tsunami and so on. And these are some of the papers they've written. And if you're interested, remember the name Stephen Porges, Porges. You can hear him speak, watch him speak on YouTube with his fascinating polyvagal theory.
Is he a PH or a V, Stephen?
Sorry?
Is he a PH, Stephen?
PH Stephen, yeah. So, to sum up, I don't really need to sum up, but Julian Scott once told me, he said, the thing in lecturing is tell them what you're going to tell them it, and then tell them what you've told them. So, breathing is a vital part of these wonderful ancient traditions of internal self-cultivation, internal practice. It has a profound effect on the body-mind, and because we all share similar organisms, it appears to have that effect on all of us. And they've discovered everybody can learn it, everybody can do it, and everybody benefits from it. It's really quite extraordinary. And it's something that, particularly, wonderful as acupuncture is, if you have a patient with anxiety, insomnia, worry, fearfulness. Needles once a week, they can be limited in their. If you can give somebody a tool that they can help themselves with and they can practice every day, not only does it increase their chances of recovery, but it empowers them and gives them something they can carry through life. So my recommendation, try it and see, suck it and see. Take up Qigong, where we take slow breathing into really sophisticated and interesting practices, but if you don't, just do slow breathing. And when you feel, I get this, start disseminating it to patients. Any last minute questions? I know it's time. No, it's only just time. Sorry, you were first and then. Did you have a question? No, somebody.
Okay.
Oh, you, sorry.
Just very quickly, it said the optimum rate is 5.5 per minute. Is it beneficial to do it slower than that, or does it become less beneficial if you go slower?
Well, people go slower than 5.5. You'll hear, if you hear people talk about they can train their breath to breathe once a minute. I don't know. It could be, it could be you wouldn't want them on your side in a battle. Maybe it's a little bit unbalanced. Peter.
Yeah, you mentioned the imagery of breathing in through the navel and also the imagery of resonating your sinuses, which is when you're chanting on the exhale. So is that the image when you're exhaling it through the nose?
Okay, so the question is, we talked about breathing into here, and then we talked about you can breathe out through the sinuses and vibrate the sinuses, and are they compatible? The point is there's loads of different practices you can do with breathing, so I would say yes, if you want to, you do a practice of chanting, say, breathe into here, and then take it up to there, and breathe into here and take it up to there. Yeah. Any more? Let's have some coffee. Tea, coffee.